The warm sun dipped below the horizon as the thick fog of history clouded the roads that would eventually lead to one of the greatest acts of courage, resistance, and humanity. An unsung hero who defied the most powerful forces of their time, saving not hundreds, not thousands, but over 2,000 enslaved people, people whose names have long since faded from history's pages. But the story of this hero has been buried in the shadows for far too long, and today, we're shedding light on a tale that many have forgotten. A story of bravery, sacrifice, and a single act of defiance that changed the lives of thousands forever. It's easy to imagine the life of an enslaved person in America during the 19th century, brutal, oppressive, and seemingly unbreakable. For generations, millions of black men, women, and children were treated as property. They were beaten, torn from their families, and forced into hard labor, living under the constant threat of violence. For them, escape was a distant dream, a whisper of freedom that seemed almost impossible to achieve. But amid this deep darkness, there was one person who not only dreamed of freedom but also took radical action to make it a reality. This hero wasn't a politician, a general, or even someone you'd find in a history book under the heading of famous abolitionists. In fact, their name might not even be one that rings a bell for most people today. But their impact is undeniable. This is the story of someone who put everything on the line, not for glory or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The year was 1860, and across the South, the practice of enslaving black people was entrenched in the fabric of society. Many had heard of the Underground Railroad, the clandestine network that helped enslaved people escape to the North, but few knew the full scale of how the system operated or the incredible risks involved. Some brave souls risked their lives to help, guiding escaping slaves through secret routes and offering sanctuary in safe houses. Yet, while many helped in small ways, few were willing to confront the forces that sought to maintain the institution of slavery head-on. Enter our hero. A figure whose actions would echo through the ages, though few would ever know their name. A person who had grown up in the very system of slavery but refused to accept it as the status quo. A person whose heart burned with the fire of justice, and who understood that true freedom couldn't be achieved by just running away, it had to be fought for. This hero didn't just take action for a handful of individuals, they helped free thousands. It's believed that this person played a pivotal role in the liberation of over 2,000 enslaved black people. That number alone is staggering, but the story behind it is even more incredible. How did one person pull off such an extraordinary feat when so many others had failed or been too afraid to act? What risks did they take? And what exactly happened during this extraordinary rescue that has remained largely untold for decades? But the story doesn't begin in a grand hall of history, it begins in a world where every step, every decision, could mean life or death. Our heroes started their journey in the most unlikely of places, within the very system they aimed to destroy. Imagine being trapped in the heart of the South, in a world built on oppression, and finding the courage to turn against everything you've ever known. This person wasn't acting alone, though. They had allies, secret networks, and a shared vision of freedom. And yet, for all the support, they still faced unimaginable odds. The risk of capture, torture, and death was always looming. The stakes were high, and the price of failure was far too steep. Still, with unwavering resolve, they gathered their resources and devised a plan that would go down in history as one of the most daring and successful acts of rebellion in the fight against slavery. But the road to freedom was not easy. As the plans began to take shape, so did the dangers. The authorities were watching, the bounty hunters were waiting, and the world seemed to be closing in around our hero. At any moment, everything could unravel, and thousands of lives could be lost. The tension was palpable, the uncertainty overwhelming. What would happen next? Could they pull it off, or would they fall victim to the same forces they were fighting against? And as the days passed, the plan took on a life of its own, growing in complexity and danger. It would require stealth, coordination, and a level of courage that few could ever comprehend. Our hero, though, was determined. They knew that there was no turning back. With every move, with every decision, they were changing the lives of not just the 2,000 souls they aimed to free, but the future of an entire nation. But the most amazing part? This is only the beginning. The journey to liberation was filled with twists, turns, and moments that would make you question the very nature of bravery, hope, and resistance. What happened when they reached the final step of their plan? How did they manage to outwit the forces that sought to stop them? And what cost did this hero pay to ensure the safety and freedom of those they helped? Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't want to miss. A story of unimaginable courage, unbreakable determination, and a hero whose name may have been forgotten by time, but whose legacy will forever live on. The journey to freeing 2,000 enslaved people is about to unfold, and you'll want to be right there with us, every step of the way. So, what happens next? How does our hero defy the odds and change history? That's a story you'll need to hear to believe. Stay with us, and find out what it truly means to be a. The plan was dangerous, and the stakes could not have been higher. The enslaved people, desperate for freedom, had waited years for a chance like this, but many of them were afraid. They had seen countless attempts to escape fail, sometimes with the brutal consequences of their loved ones being sold away, whipped, or worse. Trust was a rare commodity in a world built on fear, and the risks of betrayal ran high. The secrecy needed to pull off such an extraordinary mission meant that not many people could be trusted, and any slip-up could bring it all crashing down. The person at the heart of this mission was known by many names, but none of them captured the true spirit of who they were. Some called them a conductor of the Underground Railroad, a term that was often used to describe those who helped guide slaves to freedom. But for this hero, the title didn't feel quite right. They weren't just leading people out, they were challenging an entire system. They were fighting not just for the freedom of the individual, but for the collective soul of an entire people. Born into slavery, our hero had lived through the same horrors that bound so many others in chains. They had seen firsthand the way families were torn apart, children were whipped, and lives were wasted in the fields. They knew what it meant to be treated as less than human, and as they grew older, something inside them began to change. This person, in the depths of their heart, could not accept the world as it was. The injustice burned within them, growing stronger with each passing year. They learned what they could, listening to the older slaves, reading what little they could get their hands on, and quietly observing those who fought back in small, secret ways. But it wasn't until they witnessed the heartbreaking sale of a family friend that the final spark was ignited. The cruelty of it all shattered whatever hesitation remained. The person had already been quietly working behind the scenes, gathering resources, making alliances with abolitionists, and planning escape routes. But after that fateful day, there was no turning back. They knew that the only way to free the enslaved was to take direct action, to create a network that would not just help a few people escape, but take down the very system that kept them enslaved. The risks were unimaginable. At that time, the South was a place where the law and the economy were built on the backs of enslaved people. The plantations and industries that thrived on this cheap labor had powerful defenders, wealthy landowners, politicians, and armed militias who would stop at nothing to keep their system intact. A single whisper of rebellion could lead to a mass slaughter, and anyone who was caught aiding a slave escape was punished severely. There were even bounty hunters who made a living off of capturing runaway slaves, returning them to their owners for a reward. But the hero's resolve only grew stronger. They knew the path ahead would be treacherous, and the road to freedom would not be easy. In the dead of night, they gathered a group of trusted allies, freedom fighters, former slaves, and even sympathetic white people who shared the dream of ending slavery. These allies were integral to the operation. They knew the land, the routes, and the codes used by those who risked their lives to help others escape. Together, they formed a network so tight and so secretive that it was nearly impossible for anyone to infiltrate it. Every step was calculated. They couldn't afford to be careless, not even for a second. A slip-up would not only endanger the mission but could result in the capture or death of countless innocent people. The hero understood that the only way to pull this off was through secrecy, precision, and unwavering courage. They had seen how betrayal could destroy everything. But even more than that, they had seen how people could come together, even in the darkest of times, and fight for what was right. The network was established, and slowly but surely, the groundwork for the escape plan was set into motion. Word spread like wildfire among the enslaved community. There was hope. The hero had managed to make contact with those who had the courage to risk it all for freedom. They had begun making arrangements to transport groups of slaves from the most dangerous plantations, where they were most likely to be caught, to safer ground. But the authorities were always one step behind them. The hero knew that they had to act fast. Each day, more and more people joined the movement, and with each new person who joined, the risk of exposure grew. The network, though, was getting stronger. They had managed to secure safe houses, routes through the dense woods, and even underground tunnels in some areas. But there was one part of the plan that had yet to be fully put into place. It would be the most daring and dangerous part of all. It was a plan to liberate 2,000 people, an entire group of enslaved men, women, and children from one of the largest plantations in the South. The scale of it was almost unimaginable. To think of the logistics alone, how to move so many people undetected, how to navigate the patrolling militias, and how to ensure the safety of the young and the elderly, was enough to break the spirit of any other person. But not the hero. They understood that this could be the turning point in the fight for freedom. The operation was set for the dead of winter. The plan called for a series of small, coordinated moves. First, the slaves would be gathered in small groups and moved to a nearby town where sympathetic locals would hide them. Then, once they were safely away from the eyes of their captors, they would be led across the state line to freedom. But that was only the first part of the journey. The final step would take them through a dense, swampy forest that would be impossible to navigate without local knowledge. If they were caught there, there would be no way out. It was a risky move, but it was the only move they had. The tension was palpable. The closer they got to the date of the escape, the more anxiety filled the air. The hero felt the weight of responsibility on their shoulders. They knew that one mistake, one misstep, could mean disaster for everyone involved. But despite the fear, the hero never wavered. They had seen firsthand the horrors of slavery, and they couldn't let it continue. The urgency was clear, the time for action had come. But as the days ticked by, it became clear that not everyone was as committed as they seemed. One of the key players in the network began to act suspiciously. They had been a trusted ally, but something had changed. Could they be the one to bring everything crashing down? The hero knew they couldn't afford to make mistakes now. Time was running out. As the day of the escape drew closer, the hero could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. The network had grown in size, and with it, the complexity of the plan. But despite their careful preparations, cracks were beginning to show. Whispers of doubt spread among the group, and not everyone seemed to trust the path ahead. The hero had always known this journey wouldn't be easy, but they hadn't expected the shadows of betrayal to creep so close. One person in particular, a former slave who had become one of the most trusted operatives in the network, was beginning to act strangely. Jeremiah had been a key part of the operation. He had helped coordinate the safe houses and led many of the scouts through the forests. But recently, he had been distant, his once unshakable confidence replaced by a quiet nervousness that wasn't easy to ignore. He'd always been a man of few words, but now, even his silence seemed unsettling. The hero had to keep their eye on him, but in a movement this large, where so many lives were at stake, no one could afford to be suspicious without reason. The last thing they needed was to make accusations without proof. The operation was already fragile enough, and the last thing they could risk was creating panic among the others. The stakes had never been higher, and the threat of betrayal loomed like a storm cloud waiting to break. Still, something didn't sit right. Every time the hero caught sight of Jeremiah, they noticed that his eyes would dart toward the woods or toward the edges of the group, as though he was anticipating something. What could it be? What was he waiting for? Meanwhile, the rest of the network was also starting to feel the heat. The weather had turned colder, and the night seemed longer. But even with the biting cold, there was no time to waste. The escape had to happen soon, or it would be too late. The authorities were growing more vigilant with each passing day, tightening their grip on the enslaved people and anyone suspected of aiding them. The hero had been careful not to give away any details of the plan to too many people, but there were always eyes watching. No matter how carefully they worked, it was impossible to guarantee that they wouldn't be discovered. On one particularly cold evening, while the hero and their closest allies met to discuss final preparations, word came that some of the slaves had been caught trying to flee from another plantation. The news sent a ripple of fear through the group. The authorities were stepping up their efforts to stop the escape, and the bounty hunters were scouring the countryside, desperate for leads. It was only a matter of time before the noose tightened. The hero's heart sank, but they knew that panic would only make things worse. They couldn't let fear take hold, not now. They needed to keep everyone focused, to remind them why they were doing this. For the ones who had lost so much already, this was a final chance, a chance for something more than survival. The hero spoke to the group, urging them to stay strong, to trust in the plan. But even as they spoke, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. What if it was too late? What if Jeremiah was already working against them? Days later, the hero received a message from one of their most trusted scouts, a woman named Clara. She had been keeping an eye on the movement of the local militia, and what she had learned was troubling. The authorities had caught wind of something. It wasn't clear yet if they knew the full extent of the plan, but they had begun searching the woods for escape routes. The closer the authorities got, the harder it would be to move the enslaved people undetected. Time was running out, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. Clara also mentioned something that caught the hero off guard. She had seen Jeremiah meeting with someone in the woods, someone who was known to work with the local militia. The blood drained from the hero's face as they processed the information. Had Jeremiah been compromised? Was he working for the enemy? Or was he simply frightened, trying to make a deal to protect himself? Either way, the trust they had placed in him was shattered. This was the moment they had feared, betrayal. But even with this new information, the hero didn't act immediately. They needed to confirm it. They couldn't afford to make any moves that might expose the entire operation. The hero had been careful, calculating, but they had never anticipated this level of treachery. They had put their faith in the wrong person. How could they have been so blind? That night, the hero went to confront Jeremiah. They found him near the edge of the camp, standing alone by a small fire. His back was turned, and the shadows hid the expression on his face. The hero's pulse quickened as they approached, unsure of what they would find. Was he guilty, or was there a misunderstanding? Jeremiah, the hero called softly, making sure not to startle him. He turned slowly, his face pale in the moonlight. His eyes avoided the hero's, but he didn't look surprised to see them. "How much do you know?" the hero asked, voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside. Jeremiah hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice low. "Enough," he said. "Enough to know we're all in danger." The hero's heart raced. "What do you mean by that?" they demanded. He looked up at the hero then, a strange, knowing look in his eyes. "You think you can move 2,000 people across the South without anyone noticing? You think the authorities don't know what's coming?" The hero clenched their jaw, but they refused to show fear. "What's your part in this, Jeremiah? Are you working with them?" For a moment, it seemed like he might say something that would either confirm their worst fears or absolve him of suspicion. But instead, he simply shook his head. "I'm not working with them. But I'm not blind either. We can't keep running. Sooner or later, we'll be caught." His words hit the hero like a blow. They knew the risks, had always known them. But this was different. If Jeremiah was right, the entire escape plan was at risk. Could it be too late to change course? Should they cancel the mission and retreat before the authorities closed in? The decision weighed heavily on the hero's mind, but there was no time to think. The escape had to happen, now. The others were depending on them. But would it succeed? Could they outsmart the enemy, or had they waited too long? The hero's mind raced as they stood in the cold night air, facing Jeremiah. Every instinct told them to be cautious, to take a step back and assess the situation. But time was slipping away, and with every second that passed, the risk of failure grew. Jeremiah's words echoed in the hero's ears. Could they really pull this off? Could they truly get over 2,000 people to safety without being caught? The weight of the decision loomed large. "I won't back down," the hero said, their voice firm but tired. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." Jeremiah's expression softened for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but then the distant sound of hooves clattering against the ground shattered the silence. The hero froze, listening intently. It wasn't just the wind, wasn't just the rustle of the trees. It was the unmistakable sound of riders, militiamen on horseback, patrolling the area. The authorities were getting closer. Jeremiah's face turned ashen. "They're already on us. We've run out of time." Panic gripped the hero's chest, but they quickly forced it down. There was no room for fear now. They had to act. The plan had always been fragile, built on secrecy and timing. Now, those elements were slipping through their fingers. But they couldn't stop. If they did, everyone would be caught. "Move quickly," the hero urged, grabbing Jeremiah by the arm. "We need to alert the others. Now." The two of them sprinted through the dense woods, branches whipping at their faces as they made their way to the camp where the rest of the network had gathered. Every footfall felt like it echoed through the night. They couldn't afford to be heard, couldn't afford to be seen. As they neared the camp, the hero could see the faint glow of the fire in the distance. It should have been a comforting sight, but instead, it felt like a beacon, a signal for the approaching enemy. Inside the camp, the others were preparing, packing what little they could carry and securing the few belongings that would help them survive the long journey ahead. The group's energy was a mix of nervous anticipation and hope, but that hope was rapidly being replaced with the palpable fear of being discovered. The hero quickly scanned the faces of the group, looking for signs of anyone who might be out of place. Was there someone else who might be compromised? Could there be another Judas in their midst? As the hero and Jeremiah approached, Clara, one of the most trusted members of the network, rushed over to them. Her face was etched with worry. "They've started searching the roads," she said in a hushed voice. "We don't have much time before they're in the woods. We need to move out, now." The urgency in her voice struck the hero deeply. They had been preparing for this, but the reality of it was far more overwhelming than they had imagined. The plan was no longer just a possibility, it had become a race against time. Every delay, every misstep would make their chances of success smaller and smaller. The fear of getting caught gnawed at the hero's insides. "What about Jeremiah?" Clara asked, her eyes flicking toward the man standing beside the hero. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The hero forced a tight smile, trying to mask the growing suspicion in their chest. "He's with us. We're moving together." The group quickly assembled, a mix of fear and resolve in their eyes. The hero glanced around, noting the faces of those who were still uncertain, who still had that flicker of doubt. They couldn't afford to let it spread. The momentum had to stay strong. Just as the group began to move, the distant sound of riders grew louder. The militia was getting closer. They were here. "Move," the hero shouted, adrenaline pumping through their veins. "Go, go, go." The group scattered, following the carefully mapped-out route through the woods. The trees were dense, and the moonlight barely made it through the thick branches, but the hero knew the way well. Every step was calculated, each movement deliberate. There was no room for hesitation. No room for mistakes. But as they made their way deeper into the forest, the sound of footsteps behind them became unmistakable. Someone was following, someone was too close. The hero's heart pounded. Were they already being tracked? Or was it the sound of someone else from the group? They glanced back, trying to make sense of the situation, but the trees blocked their view. "Keep moving," the hero barked to the others. "Don't stop for anything." Ahead, Clara was leading the group, and the hero could see the faint flicker of her lantern as she forged ahead, but every second that passed made the forest feel more like a maze, and the sounds of pursuit more real. Then, suddenly, there was a loud crack from behind them, branches snapping under the weight of something moving fast. The hero's stomach dropped. Someone had definitely seen them. "They're coming!" Clara shouted, her voice full of panic. "Split up," the hero ordered. "Everyone, take cover." The group quickly scattered into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as the hero ducked behind a thick tree, their breath ragged in their chest. Their mind raced. Were they about to be captured? Could they fight their way out of this, or was this the end of everything? From where the hero crouched, they could hear the sound of riders approaching, the beat of hooves now deafening. But there was no time to think. The hero quickly scanned their surroundings, noting the positions of the others. They had to make it to the next safe house, a mile away. But how could they get there without being spotted? The militia was getting closer, and the path to safety seemed longer with every passing moment. And then, just as the riders seemed to be closing in, the unexpected happened. There was a sudden shout, a scream of panic from one of the members of the group. The hero's heart stopped. The militia had found them. The plan had failed. Everything seemed to fall apart in that instant. The group was divided, scrambling in every direction. The hero's mind swirled with 1,000 questions. Was this the end? Had they been betrayed? Or was this just the beginning of an even more dangerous game? The clock was ticking, and the hero had only one choice left: lead their people to freedom, or die trying. The hero's heart raced as the scream echoed through the trees, the sound slicing through the tense silence like a knife. The group had been discovered. The militia was closing in. They had no choice but to move faster, but every step felt heavier, more desperate. The hero's mind was spinning. How had it happened? They had been so careful. But now, with the sudden panic that rippled through the group, it was impossible to know who had been spotted and who had managed to stay hidden. They could only hope that the others could stay quiet long enough to slip through the tightening net. But then, as the hero scanned the woods, their eyes caught something that froze them in place. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was a figure they didn't recognize, a person who shouldn't have been there. The light from the distant campfire caught the stranger's face, just for a moment, and the hero's stomach dropped. It was a woman, dressed in dark clothes, her expression unreadable, but her presence was unmistakable. She wasn't one of their own. She was too calm, too composed for someone who was supposed to be hiding in the woods. It wasn't just her appearance that made the hero's heart skip a beat, it was the way the stranger held herself. There was an eerie confidence in her stance, as though she knew exactly what was happening, and worse, as if she were orchestrating it. The hero's pulse quickened. Had the militia sent someone to infiltrate their ranks? Was she a spy, sent to unravel the entire plan? Before the hero could act, the woman seemed to notice them watching. She didn't flinch, didn't look startled. Instead, she smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent a chill down the hero's spine. "Still trying to escape, I see," she said, her voice soft but laced with an unmistakable edge. The words hung in the air like a threat. The hero's instincts screamed to run, to warn the others, but they couldn't afford to lose their focus, not now. "Who are you?" the hero demanded, their voice low and steady despite the rising panic in their chest. The woman took a step forward, and the hero tensed, but she didn't advance aggressively. She was calculating, almost amused by the tension that surrounded her. "My name doesn't matter," she replied, her tone almost dismissive. "What matters is that you're in over your head." The hero's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" The woman shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "I want what everyone else wants, freedom. For myself. And for all of us." The words stung, but they weren't the words of an ally, they felt more like an accusation. "You're working with the militia," the hero said, more to themselves than to her, as realization began to settle in. A soft laugh escaped the woman. "Oh, no. I'm not one of them. But I do know them. And they know me." The hero's mind was spinning. Was this another trap? Had they walked into a network of informants? The woman's cryptic response only added more weight to the growing unease that had been building within them. "Then why are you here?" the hero pressed, their voice growing sharper. "I'm here to offer you a choice," the woman said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and something darker. "You can continue on this reckless journey, running blindly into danger, or you can listen to me and have a chance at survival." The hero's gaze locked with hers, the tension in the air palpable. This was no longer about just getting out of the woods, it was about understanding who was truly in control, who was pulling the strings. And if this woman was a part of it, the hero needed to know what she wanted. "What's your game? What are you really offering?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the hero's. "I'm offering you an escape, a way out for all of you, without the bloodshed. The authorities are closing in fast, and if you keep running, they'll catch you, every last one of you." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. "But there's another way. A way for you to get what you want and for me to get what I want, too." The hero felt a shiver of doubt creeping up their spine. This wasn't a simple offer, it felt like a dangerous gamble. "And what do you want?" they asked, their voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at them. The woman's smile was slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "I want the same thing you do. Freedom. But freedom on my terms." The hero's stomach churned. It was clear now, this was no simple offer of help. The woman had an agenda, and it wasn't aligned with their own. Her freedom wasn't just about escaping slavery, it was about taking control. "How do I know I can trust you?" the hero asked, keeping their tone even, despite the growing sense of danger. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder, as if ensuring no one was listening. "You don't," she said quietly. "But trust me, I'm the only one who can get you out of this alive. You're already on the brink of disaster. You'll be caught, or worse, you'll lead everyone to their graves. I can help you change that, but you have to make a choice." The hero's mind raced. They knew they couldn't afford to make a wrong move. But what if this woman was right? What if the plan was doomed to fail, and this was the only chance for survival? "Who else knows about this?" the hero asked, trying to read her expression. The woman's eyes flickered with something that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps it was just calculation. "Let's just say I've got connections. And the moment you decide to trust me, I can lead you and your people to safety." She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But only if you act fast. Time is running out." In the distance, the sound of horses grew louder again, and the hero's stomach twisted in panic. The militia was closer now, and the group was scattered in the woods. There was no more time for questioning. No more time for hesitation. But was this really the way out? Or was this just another trap? The hero didn't know. And the clock was ticking. "What do you want me to do?" the hero asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The woman's smile was almost predatory now. "Follow me. I'll show you the way. But once you're in, there's no turning back." The stakes had never been higher. The hero was standing at a crossroads, with no clear path forward. Would they trust this stranger, or would they continue the fight with the hope of escaping on their own terms? The tension hung in the air, thick with uncertainty, as the militia closed in from all sides. The tension in the air was almost unbearable as the hero looked from the woman to the woods around them. The militia was closing in fast, there was no time to think, no time to question. They had already come too far, risking everything to save their people. The choice was clear, but still, the hero hesitated. Could they trust this mysterious woman? Could they risk it all on a promise that felt too good to be true? "Follow me," she urged, her voice firm but not unkind. "You've made it this far. You can't let it end now." The urgency in her voice pierced through the hero's doubts. There was no more time to waste. Without another word, they turned to the group, gathering those who were close enough, signaling to move in the direction the woman pointed. It was a gamble, and the hero knew it. But what choice did they have? The sound of hooves was getting closer, too close. They began to move swiftly, their feet crunching against the underbrush as they navigated the dense woods. The woman led them with an unsettling confidence, her path deliberate, as if she had been here before. The hero's mind raced, the question gnawing at them: who was she really, and what was her true motivation? But there was no time for answers, not when every second could be their last. As they moved deeper into the forest, the distant voices of the militia became a faint murmur. The pressure mounted as they neared the supposed safe route. But the deeper they went, the more uncertain the hero felt. There was a sense of disorientation, of confusion. Something didn't feel right. The trees felt thicker, the ground rougher, and the silence between them all felt more oppressive with each step. Finally, they reached a clearing, only it wasn't the safe haven they had hoped for. The hero's heart skipped a beat as they looked around, taking in the surroundings. This wasn't an escape. This was a trap. The woman turned, a wicked smile twisting her lips as she revealed her true intentions. "You should have listened," she said, her voice a low, almost mocking whisper. "You thought you could escape, but you've walked right into my hands." It hit the hero like a blow to the chest. The group was surrounded now. More riders, more soldiers, this had all been part of the woman's plan. She wasn't a savior. She had lured them here to capture them. The entire network of escape routes had been compromised, and the hero had walked straight into the very trap they had been trying to avoid. Anger and betrayal surged through the hero's veins, but it wasn't enough to stop the cold realization that they had been played. The militia closed in around them, the weight of defeat heavy in the air. The hero wanted to fight, wanted to run, but there was no escape now. The path they had chosen had been a dead end all along. But then, just as the tension reached its peak, a loud crash rang out from the trees, followed by the sound of shouting and chaos. The hero's head snapped up, instinctively scanning the area. And there, emerging from the woods, was a group of figures, dressed in familiar clothing, faces hardened but determined. It was the group they thought they had left behind, those they had thought were captured. They had escaped. But more than that, they had turned the tables. The militia was thrown into disarray as the two groups collided, chaos erupting around the clearing. The hero could barely process what was happening. The woman's face was a picture of shock as she realized the trap had been reversed. What she hadn't counted on was that the hero had known her true intentions all along. They had seen the signs, recognized the duplicity in her behavior, and had prepared a countermove. While the woman had led them here, believing she had them cornered, the hero's group had quietly followed behind, circling back to catch the militia by surprise. The fight that ensued was brutal, a blur of motion and shouting. But the hero was no longer at the center of it. Instead, they found themselves fighting alongside their people, their resolve strengthened by the realization that the battle for freedom wasn't just about surviving, it was about taking back control. As the militia was forced to retreat, the heroes' heart pounded in their chest, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something more, a sense of triumph. They had won, but it wasn't over yet. There were still many battles to fight, and the road to freedom was long and fraught with danger. But for the first time in what felt like forever, they felt like they had a chance. And then, in the midst of the chaos, the hero locked eyes with the woman, the traitor. She was struggling against one of their people, her eyes wild with disbelief. It was clear she hadn't expected this turn of events. She had thought she was the one in control, the one pulling the strings, but she had underestimated the courage and resolve of the hero's group. But as the militia withdrew, the hero's gaze lingered on the woman. She had been part of the reason for this victory, even if she had never intended it. The trap she set had been what forced their people to fight harder, to band together in ways they hadn't before. In a twisted way, she had inadvertently pushed them toward their true victory. Still, there was no room for mercy in the hero's heart. This betrayal, this manipulation, would not go unpunished. They watched as the woman was taken away, her fate uncertain, but one thing was clear, she had played her part, and now, she would answer for it. With the last of the militia fleeing into the woods, the hero turned to the group. They had survived. They had done the impossible. But the battle wasn't over. The road to freedom stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous, but they would walk it together. They had learned a valuable lesson, trust must be earned, and the fight for freedom was not just about survival, it was about fighting for the future. And as the sun began to rise over the horizon, the hero knew that no matter how many obstacles lay ahead, they would face them all together. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, casting a golden hue over the clearing, the hero felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The militia had retreated, their power shattered in a single moment of unity. The battle was over for now, but the war was far from finished. The group, battered but unbroken, stood together in the quiet aftermath, a sense of victory pulsing through them. They had faced betrayal, uncertainty, and the threat of death, yet they had emerged stronger, united in a cause far greater than themselves. But as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what lay ahead started to sink in. This victory, though hard-earned, was only a small piece of the puzzle. There would be more challenges to come, more dangers to face. The hero looked around at their people, those they had fought so fiercely to protect, and they knew that the journey was only beginning. The road to freedom was long and uncertain, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was more than enough. In the days that followed, the group moved cautiously but with renewed purpose. They couldn't stay in one place for long, every moment of peace was a moment that the enemy could use to track them down. But they had learned valuable lessons. Trust, when given freely, was a powerful weapon. And when people came together for a common goal, no force on earth could break them apart. The hero found themselves reflecting on everything that had led them to this point. The escape from the plantation, the arduous journey through the wilderness, the dangerous game of cat and mouse with the militia, it all felt like a lifetime ago. But through it all, one thing had remained clear, the will to survive, to fight for a future where their people could live free, was stronger than any obstacle in their path. They had made it through the darkest of times, and they would continue to do so, because freedom was worth every sacrifice. As the group traveled onward, the hero took time to speak with those who had followed them through the journey. Each person had their own story, their own struggles, but they were united by the same hope. Together, they were building something bigger than themselves. The hero shared in their triumphs and their losses, their dreams for a better tomorrow. And in the midst of it all, they found something unexpected, peace. Not the kind of peace that comes with the absence of conflict, but the kind that comes from knowing you are doing the right thing, even when the odds are stacked against you. But even as the hero saw the growth in their people, they couldn't help but think of the woman who had betrayed them. She had been part of their plans unraveling, a thorn in their side at the most crucial moment. Yet, as they thought back on everything that had happened, the hero realized something else. Her role, though destructive, had ultimately helped them. The trap she had set had forced them to move quickly, to be strategic, and to confront their fears head-on. Without her, they might not have come together as they did. The hero couldn't say they understood her motivations, but they could acknowledge that the woman had played her part, even if it wasn't in the way anyone had hoped. Still, there was no forgiveness in the hero's heart. Her actions had cost lives, and for that, she would have to answer. But the hero didn't dwell on the past. They had learned from it, and now, they would use that knowledge to shape the future. Days turned into weeks, and the group found themselves moving further away from the militia's reach. They had forged new paths, found new allies, and learned how to survive in a world that had always sought to break them. There were moments of doubt, moments when the hero questioned whether they were truly making a difference. But each time, they remembered the faces of those they had saved, the lives they had changed. That was the reason they fought. That was the reason they would never stop. One evening, as the group set up camp near a river, the hero sat by the fire, watching the flames dance in the night. They thought about how far they had come, from the fear of capture to the exhilaration of freedom. They thought about the stories they would tell their children, the legacy they would leave behind. In the midst of the fight for survival, they had created something far more powerful, a sense of hope that would carry on long after the fire had burned out. As the last of the militia's forces dwindled into memory, the hero knew the battle for freedom would never truly end. There would always be those who sought to oppress, to control. But the spirit of the people would not be broken. They had fought, and they had won. And as long as they stood together, no force in the world could take that from them. In the quiet of the night, the hero looked around at their people, their family. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt full of possibilities. The road ahead was long, but they would walk it, side by side, with courage and conviction. The hero's journey was far from over, but one thing was certain: they would never stop fighting for freedom. The fire crackled, and for a moment, the world felt still. In the distance, the sound of footsteps faded, and all that remained was the quiet promise of what was to come. The hero, and all those they had fought for, had found their place in the world. And no matter how dark the night became, they would never be alone. The end of one journey was only the beginning of another. The story of the hero, of the people who had defied the odds and claimed their freedom, would live on in the hearts of those who followed. It was a story of courage, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bond that comes when people stand together. And as the hero's gaze turned to the horizon, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have the strength to face it head-on. Because they were no longer just survivors. They were free.